Okay, what I'm doing is I'm removing my oil pan on my 2003 Ford Ranger, and it's a 3-liter automatic transmission. And in the manual it says you have to take the transmission out to get at the oil pan, just to take the oil pan off. And what I'm doing is I'm going to change a piston and rings, so I'm undoing my oil pan on this truck. And I turn inside the manual and look, and it says to remove the transmission, and then you can remove the oil pan. So what I'm going to show you today, you can take the oil pan off without removing the transmission. I just did it without having to take anything off other than the starter and the bolts that hold the pan and the gasket. I already had this pan. I had the transmission out of this truck, okay? So I did have the gasket. I reused it. These are $50 Canadian. I glued the gasket to the pan, and then I glued it onto the block as I bolted it up, all in one shot. And what I can show you is the back of the reason why they're saying to take the transmission out first, and you can't even change the oil pan without taking the transmission off, is because there's a flex plate, not a flex plate, like a dust shield, and it's all the way up. It goes all the way around the bell housing of the transmission with the bolts going through, and it comes down, and it goes around. I'm going to go underneath and show you. It goes around the pan at the back, so you can't get the pan out, even though you undo all the bolts. And you took the starter out so that, you know, it looks like you could undo that plate. It's like a shield that covers the ring gear, the starter gear, the big flywheel. And yeah, so that's fine, right? You go, okay, I got to take the tranny out. But I didn't. I just pushed with my fingers really, really hard on that plate. And I really worked the pan until I was almost going to get a screwdriver in there, because at some points you can see that the plate is further in and you can start to pull the pan down a bit. But once I got it past that covering, it came out, but it kind of tore the gasket and everything. And the gasket actually has like a tab, has like an alignment tab right here. See this tab? This goes down inside where, like on the lower part of the pan. So that tab, yeah, okay, you're never going to get this tab again back in there if you get a new $50 gasket. These are neoprene rubber with plastic reinforcing and everything. This one's all broken apart because I pulled it off the pan because it was glued on there so good. But what I'm showing you is that, yeah, you can get this pan off. And once you get this pan off, I wasn't shy about this at all. What I did, I went right in there and I cut this right off. And this is nothing. This is just a covering. One of the starter bolts goes through right here. And then there's like a inspection window to undo your torque converter bolts. This is an automatic. So like there's a bolt that goes right through into the bell housing. So that'll hold this plate back in place. And there's another bolt up in here. I'm going to show you how I cut this off. I just use a zip grinder. And of course this is aluminum, right? So you're going to have aluminum filings up all over, but I'm doing the bearings and all that. I'm going to get in there. I'm going to take the pistons out. See, I got aluminum filings all over in there, but aluminum's very thin. It's not heavy. Like this, you wouldn't believe that zip disc just zipped right through there. And see, I have a perfect access now to put my pan straight back up with a brand new gasket on it. And I'm not going to fart around taking out this transmission because, you know, of course, a transmission, this thing's pretty big. It's a 5-speed automatic and 2003 3-liter. So, yeah, see where I cut it? I left some material there because the transmission lines were in the way. I would have liked to have cut it further up because there's one bolt there that goes right through to the threads right into the bell housing. And then there's another one, like I say, see that other one right there? That's for the inspection cover, so you can get at your torque converter bolts that are there. But I've built some cars before, and I've done this kind of stuff, and this is very, very, very simple fix. Because once I put that bolt in with that inspection cover, there's a whole cover that goes over this, and there's going to be a bolt up there and then a bolt going through here. That's going to hold it right up in place where it was already. See, once the pan's back on, because you can see that's a real problem, is just getting that pan back up in there because of this cover. They should have just made this cover so it would remove. It looks like they were going to, because there's even a bolt hole here, but there's nothing through. They didn't put another bolt on the bell housing. It's like they forgot. You know, they don't take these things apart, right? They just put them together and send it down the factory. So here's the other bolt that lines right up, and the bolts go through this way. So the starter goes on this side. Put your starter on, put your bolt through. If your bolt doesn't quite go through, you know, you can just wiggle this, because you can still kind of access this even though the pan will be on. But I don't think it's going to even be a problem. It's such a minor thing to have to worry about one starter bolt. I mean, you can cut this in different places if you want to experiment with it, like across here. Some guys might cut it right across here, eh? But I don't think there's any videos on this, and I thought it was kind of cool to share it, because these bolts all go through this way, and the starter sits on this side, so it'll sit right back on there, and you won't even know. You actually won't even know this plate was cut by the time this is all bolted back together. And I didn't have to undo all the torque converter bolts. Of course, I'm gonna take the heads off to do the piston rings and change a piston that's worn out. So yeah, other than that, this is a windage tray. It just came right off. Like it popped out. Like once I broke the seal, it came right down. And I had this off because I had this transmission out, and I did notice a piston's got a lot of slop in it up here. The number 4 piston. The Teflon's gone and everything, so I'm going to pull that piston out the top, of course, but you can't get at nothing unless you could take the pan off. So I've already rebuilt this whole transmission. I don't want to have to take it out again for nothing, right? So that's why I'm doing it this way. I just pushed really hard on this little plate. I had my fingers up in there pushing on it and had the pan all the way towards the front of the truck, pushing it on it, and you'll feel it'll just start to go, it'll just pop down. That's how it came out. You know, and of course a pan even rots, right? So it's a horrible design not to be able to make it so you can at least change it. I don't know what they were thinking, and I don't know what the guys that wrote the repair manual, you know, I wish they'd kind of give people a heads up instead of telling them that they got to pull the tranny for the first thing to take the oil pan off. So yeah, that's it for today. I got the pan off, and Y pipe's got to come off, and I'm going to tear off the whole top part of this engine to do the rings and hone the cylinders. Just put rings back in and do one piston, that's all. I'm not boring it out or anything. This was the Flex Fuel 2003 3-liter ethanol. So I got to get a pop-up piston for it. The right piston that goes in there. And the heads are those 47cc chamber heads. They're not the 49cc. So they're a little bigger. Smaller port, sorry, inside the chamber there. It's kind of like a special engine. It's got a VIN code T, not a VIN code U for the engine code. So I'm going to work on all that. Just keep the block and not change the injectors and all that, because some guys say they got to change the injectors on these just to get them to run right again if you put a regular gasoline engine in. But I also read that a 2002 to 2008 or 2008 Taurus or 2006 Taurus 3-liter overhead valve. This is just the overhead valve engine. It's not the like single overhead cam or dual overhead cam or anything. It's just the overhead valve engine. I think the 4-liter has the same, because this transmission does go on every single Ranger. The bell housing is almost the same, so that covering is probably the same on the 4-liter as the 3-liter. And once you get your pan out, yeah, like I say, you just cut this off, and you can, I'd put this back in because it is a spacer for the starter bolt on the one side there. This is actually like a shim, right? So, but yeah, like I said, I've had this transmission out, and I know that it's all one piece. It goes all the way around, and there's no other way around it. You know, getting the pan out is cool and everything, but trying to put it back in, you know, you're not gonna. The only other thing I can think of just offhand is if you could break this tab off on your oil pan gasket, and then, you know, just kind of force it back up until it pops in place. But this is like an alignment thing to keep sure that this doesn't go out of place on your oil pan, eh? I don't know if you can see it. That's the tab. It's just a plastic tab. But that was mainly, you know, it was almost out, and I'm like, it's still not coming out. But I was able to. It started to pull the gasket off the pan and stay up there. The gasket wanted to stay up on the engine block, and that's what happened when I first took this pan off. The gasket was up on the engine, and I had to pull it down. But you know, you're probably going to want to change your oil pan gasket if you do get it off, when you get it off. So that's the secret. Okay. Yeah, that's my truck. It's just, it's got a VIN code T, I don't know. It's kind of hard to share that on here. This is really not a well-lit garage. I'm using a work light that's under there. So I have it way up in the air. I have the whole back end. I was ready to pull the transmission. It's way up on jack stands, because according to that manual, you got to do all that. But now I don't have to take nothing off, like the drive shaft, the cross member that holds the transmission up in there, and I'm really happy about that. So yeah, don't be scared to take your oil pan off. It's just a matter of forcing your fingers in behind and pulling down on the pan.